when you're talking about editing, we're going to talk about the idea or watch for it in the movie that cuts come at kind of untraditional times. So when you're watching a scene, you kind of get a rhythm and a pace to what's happening on screen. And oftentimes in a French New Wave film, you're gonna feel like shots last a little bit longer than they probably should, and you get this, you're like waiting for something new to happen or to see something different, especially compared to what you're used to watching these days. And these films will cut at a very kind of awkward time, and that was by design and on purpose, right? They definitely use jump cuts, meaning you're going to see cuts that get made where it's not a smooth transition to the next shot. Like you might cut on the same person just later in the scene and it'll look like it just bounced or jumped to something new. So look for those jump cuts and see if you can identify them as you watch the film. They didn't worry about matching eye lines or continuity when they were shooting and editing. Okay, when you watch movies, everything kind of feels like it's all happening in this order that flows and is very smooth. That's typically what's happening, even within a film that is shot kind of untraditionally, where they're bouncing around sequentially in time. Still within scenes, they're trying to make it so that it feels smooth. You're gonna see that they're gonna not care whether it looks like somebody's looking in the right direction or that a cut necessarily matches exactly what's going on continuity wise. You'll find those cuts all along the way in this particular movie. Okay, so look for those things in the editing. When we're talking about acting in this movie, um, there's an attempt to capture real people in real events, and so that's part of the whole idea behind them shooting chronologically. Is they wanted the character to be able to stay in the moment and follow that linear path through the story as if it was happening to them in real life. So that was kind of the goal. Patricia is portrayed as kind of almost a siren in the movie, where she doesn't want to fall in love to the point of betraying Mikhail, so he'll be forced to leave, right? That's kind of the idea behind her particular character. She's played by a woman named Jean Seberg, who was, had a very small career, but this film kind of made her a big deal, internationally anyway. They definitely use long takes, so you're definitely going to see scenes where they don't edit it a lot. They don't cut around from one person to the other. Like usually when you're looking at a conversation, they're going to show you a shot of one person talking, then they cut to another shot of another person responding, and then back to the other person as they say their lines. This film, you're going to see a lot of long takes where they just sit and have these conversations. And those are very difficult on the actor because they have to remember all the dialogue. Like they got to remember all their lines and still stay in character, which is a much larger challenge than being able to just throw off a couple lines, then we can yell cut and go to the next shot. This happens a little bit different, okay? But it makes it feel more real, more documentary-ish when we can do these long takes with the actors. But if you ever talk to actors, they'll let you know that doing long takes is very challenging for them because staying in character and remembering all the dialogue and being able to do all of that and kind of move around the scene and just be effective at what it is their job is, it gets more challenging the longer the takes. So we're talking about sound design. The sounds that are being used are creating a sense of being in the space. So you will see some sound design in this movie, and it's all geared towards making it feel real. Okay, they're not doing anything that's kind of adding to or making it feel more cinematic. They're just trying to make it feel real with the noises and the sound effects and the different things that they're employing. And also in this film, much of the dialogue is dubbed in later, meaning they didn't have the ability with the equipment they were using to get quality sound on set as they were filming because they were kind of running around like a documentary and using small cameras and they didn't have the best of audio equipment. So when you're dubbing in sound, that means in post-production, when you go to editing, people are going to re-deliver the lines as they watch the scene play out in front of them on the scene. Now, honestly, off the top of my head, I can't remember if these actual actors did their own dubbing, but oftentimes you'll have other actors dub for actors in general, especially when it's in a different language. But if I remember correctly, I believe these actors that are in this movie did the dubbing for themselves, at least for the main characters. Okay, so that's a little bit unique with sound design. We are going to watch some films that have dub sound, and we'll talk about that along the way some more. But there's a difference between shooting live sound and then using that as we edit the movie, and then having to dub it in later. And again, for this movie, it wasn't for any other reason than they didn't have the equipment that they needed to get quality sound while they were filming. So the cinematic terms for this particular module, things you need to think about and understand as you go to the discussion board and the quiz, would be the French New Wave. So understanding what the French New Wave is, that it's this movement that took place in the from 1958 to about the mid-60s, so it's a very small movement. And it was all about changing and revolutionizing and being experimental with filmmaking and storytelling in general. It was all about just being creative and coming up with new ways to express ideas and tell stories. And the French New Wave, although very small, it's probably the most referenced cinema movement of all time when it comes to filmmakers finding inspiration in older cinema. So if you talk to Steven Spielberg all the way up to whoever the most current filmmaker is, they're all kind of influenced heavily by the French New Wave. Many of them are. Auteur theory. So auteur theory is the whole idea that the camera is pen, like the pen is to the author of a novel, right? They are writing the story with the camera, and every single thing that gets decided and ends up on screen is a choice made by the director. They are, it's their vision, their idea making its way to the screen. Jump cuts. So jump cuts, and I think there's a video in the contextual page that goes over different types of edits, or talks about jump cutting. And again, jump cutting is just when you put one shot next to another. When you put those two together, the cut doesn't feel very smooth. So you'll feel the jarringness of that particular cut because they're not set up next to each other in a very smooth way. And it's really just because of whatever's in shot one doesn't match up very well with what's in shot two. So that's usually what we would call a jump cut. Long takes are just sequences where we're filming a lot of material, a lot of the scene without making a cut. We're just going to shoot a long take of this thing playing out, and the camera's going to be handheld, kind of moving around and following the people. And that would be considered a long take, which leads us to the handheld camera, meaning the camera is being held by the camera operator. So a few slides back, there's a shot of Jean-Luc Godard holding the camera in his hand. That's handheld camera work. So we're not using tripods, we're not using dollies, we're not using cranes, we're not using steady cams, we're not using all this fancy equipment to hold the camera. We're just putting it in our hands and shooting our movie. And the last thing, which we didn't really touch on, I should have touched on this in the actor portion or the acting portion, is something called character side or breaking the fourth wall. Okay, same thing, character side, breaking the fourth wall. So breaking the fourth wall or a character side is when the character in the movie on screen looks at the camera and appears to be talking to the audience. So this is a technique that's been used a bunch of different times. One of the more famous ones that stands out to me, although it happens a lot, there was a TV series called The Office where they would look at the camera all the time. Didn't necessarily speak to the camera, but definitely address the camera. There's a new comedy series called Abbott Elementary. They look at the camera often. That's called a character side. But in this movie, or in a movie like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Ferris Bueller actually talks to the camera many times, or at least a few times throughout the film. That's what's getting done here in the French New Wave cinema era, right? This is the first time that we've seen characters look right at the camera and talk to the audience. And there's a famous sequence with Michael where he's driving to the city and he's having a conversation, and in that conversation he looks directly at the camera like he's talking to you, the audience member, because you're the person sitting next to him in this car. And so when you're looking at it in French New Wave cinema time, right, in the 1960s, this is a very like unique style, a unique choice to make because it wasn't something that was done. Nowadays, it's not going to look as dramatic, but back then it would have been this very unique thing, very experimental at the time. So look for that sequence, look for that scene, and make sure you go to the discussion board and look at what the prompts are so that when you are watching the movie, you can kind of know what to look for and know what you're going to be trying to address in your discussion board post. So if you got questions, please let me know. If you don't understand something in here, I'll definitely help you out if you have any questions. Look at all the pages on Canvas. Make sure you get everything you need. And then, make sure you make your way through the discussion board post and the quiz.